Okay, so what do I want? I'm going to have to, here's the piece I want. I'm going to have to advance this one full turn, tension it. Alright, well I can do that I think. And then I'm going to put the base plate on and put the film advance lever on there so things can't unwind. Retinettes are a little bit awkward to work on for this regard because they don't have a lock lever, as I mentioned earlier. That lack of the lock lever just makes things a little bit awkward to work on because this immediately wants to unwind. It's got nothing holding it in place. If I hold that with my finger from underneath, I think that might work. Some of these screw heads are in less than pretty condition, which I suppose shouldn't come as a shock. It's trying to get away. Let's see if I can find the film advance lever and get that in position while the going's still good. Right. Okay, so film advance is working nicely. That action is nice and smooth. There's absolutely no problem with the return tension of that film advance. Not that I expected there would be, but it does mean that whatever fault existed with this camera that someone felt was serious enough that they needed to dive in and start mucking with stuff, it wasn't that. Okay, so what am I short on here? I'm short one screw there. Oh yes, I think I'd made note of that earlier. What have I got in my spare leftovers? I have one screw with a damaged head. That's what that one would have been. It's too ugly to use that, so I'll just get another one. This will do nicely. And we'll put the last screw in that advanced lever for good measure, I think. Right, the film advance is good. I've got to connect up this rack at the top to here. Means I've got to undo that screw. But it's alright now because the film advance lever will stop that from unwinding. Previously it would have just unwound and driven me nuts. This fits in here like that, and that fits in there like that. Okay, so that cocking action's working nicely. That's all working very smoothly. Make sure that screw's tight. So that was quite a handy trick, just using that to hold it together, that gear, to hold my film advance together while I was fighting with stuff. Okay, so the shutter from memory, I'm just trying to remember exactly how I want this lined up. You need to make sure that this is sitting at the right angle. It couples to this piece. The flap should be upwards in the rest position like that. I'll put some grease on the back of that. The worst that can happen is that I'll be a tooth out with the adjustment and I'll just have to lift this out and put it back in the right place. Yeah, that's one tooth out there, I would have thought. That looks to me like that's exactly where it should be. Now the shutter release action is this thing. I'll put a bit of grease on the back of that. And drop that into position. Those two pieces are retained with this plate. It sits like that. So let's put a touch of grease around there, around there. And it's held in place with two screws. Alright, so where are we now? Okay, so we've got the camera body together, the cocking action's all right, so the film advance part, basically the body's together. I think at this stage I might just as well put the leatherette on the base and close it up at the bottom of the camera. It'll get all the leatherette out of the way. Right, so that film advance just annoyed me, didn't it? Yeah, it did. Oh, we can deal with that. Right, so Leatherette on that camera base. Let's get that in place. That's all clean here and ready to go. So it just needs to be apply the adhesive and put it in place. Well, the adhesive that was on there was that nasty gooey stuff. It was really gooey. It was, oh mind you, some of that would have been down to the fact that I'd have put a bit of naphtha under there to loosen it up, but it was a really odd consistency, very jelly-like gooey consistency it was. Get this in place. Now the Leatherettes always shrink back somewhat, so they don't want to press down around raised bosses very neatly. So you always need to encourage them around places like this. But otherwise that's looking good. Now I need to get my film advance lever on there again, and its rest position is there. It will take a bit. Oh, I've just dropped it again. There. Get a screw in there. Not finding it. That's better. Right, these screw heads are a bit odd. The slots in them are quite shallow. They don't engage a screwdriver particularly well. Right, so that's the leatherette on the base of the camera. That's good to have that out of the way. I'll get now the back catch cover. We have that, but we don't have the spring for it. The spring was missing, so I have to find a spring. At least we have the screws, so we're part of the way there. Let me find a spring. Okay, well, I was successful in my hunt and I found a spring for the back catch cover. So I'll get this assembled. This is always a bit tricky, but you know, it usually goes pretty smoothly. Now that spring's a little bit compressed, it's not providing much tension there. Let me just give that a little adjustment. It's important that the spring has some tension here, because otherwise it won't hold this assembly together while I'm trying to get it in place. If it has too much tension, That's even more of a problem, as the spring won't want to stay sitting there quietly and it'll want to disappear across the room. That's working nicely. Means I can put the other screw in place. That's good result. Now, the Leatherette patch. I had a quick hunt around. I didn't have a Leatherette patch, but I did have this one, which is actually leather. It's a very similar texture, and that will do nicely. So I will fit that. Oh, when I look at it, I see that it's not leather at all, it's Leatherette. So it's a Leatherette patch that I've cut out of something. Here we go. So that's the main body of the camera assembled and ready to go. Now I've got to look at that top cover because that was a bit of a mess. So I better do that next, I suppose. And that is here. That rattle sound's not good. It means that this is probably loose. It is. I think I can clean those lenses in places as easy as anything else. So I'm just going to slacken these two screws off and slide this mask forward so it's holding that glass firmly. That's better. I'll clean that glass with glass cleaner. Now it's still not holding that particularly firmly. Still, the viewfinder lens is good. I can see through that nicely. Now the eyepiece here, that is actually a lens. That's plano convex, I think, that one. The flat side to the rear. Of course, you can't get this eyepiece off easily. You can certainly get it off. It's riveted on, but it's no fun getting it off, and it's worse getting it back. So generally speaking, don't disturb it. And these are the only optical components of the finder. There's no frames or anything like that in there. I'm just looking through it, it's nice and clean. It's looking very good. So I'll clean the inside of this top cover with some naphtha. It's like everything else here, there's a little bit of dust and grit, sand, things of that nature. Not much. Of course, we don't want any loose in the camera. Just checking this frame counter. Seems to work quite well. And I'll clean up this top cover with a bit of naphtha. it's not abundantly clear why somebody felt the need to take the accessory shoe off here, since it doesn't get you anywhere. But sometimes when people have a screwdriver in their hand, they just keep going. Well, that looks quite good. Now where's my accessory shoe? Here it is. Now it's a little bit out of shape. I'm just going to give that a couple of taps with the hammer before we put that in place. Right, well that'll do nicely. Now I think we have 2 of the 3 screws for the shoe. And they're in reasonable condition. Oh, there was a stray screw with this thing that somebody had probably forced in somewhere, which most definitely didn't come from there. That may have been what was in there. Here's a 3rd screw. We'll use that one. Okay, so here's the top cover. The shutter release will need to go in the body, and the film release button. These were a bit entertaining. I recently had a little bit of trouble with one of these, so I'm a bit sensitive about this. Let's just say we'll put shutter release shaft. Alright, I'll put a little bit of molybdenum paste on that shutter release shaft. And I have a return spring for that. And pop that down into the body. See if I can do it without losing the spring. That's not going well. That's better. You have to line it up with a hole in the body casting, and you really only get one go at it, because if otherwise, as you pull it back out, the spring has the habit of falling off the shaft, and of course it's tucked down in there where no one will ever see it again. I'm going to put a couple of spots of lacquer onto that screw to encourage it to never come loose. That'll do. And I'll put a little bit of synthetic grease on this gear at the top here. Yeah. Where is the shutter release button? It can't be far away. It's here. And the film release button is here. I'm going to put a bit of synthetic grease on that. Put the spring on there. And that sits in a little hole in the top of the casting, right there. It doesn't balance by itself, that would be too easy. It's cursed. But I hold that in place while I get the top cover in place. Like that. The film release button's working normally. Hang on, why is my film advance just jammed? Find out what's going on here. I haven't got the chrome trim around the top of that body. That's what's happened. Getting ahead of myself. You people aren't shouting loud enough. This wasn't going to go anywhere without the strap lugs anyway. We could do with the rewind too, I suppose. Let's put that in place. So some synthetic grease into the bush. That goes nicely, and there were 2 screws for that. Now one of the screws was missing. In fact, they had 2 completely wrong screws in there. We took the camera apart. Let me find a suitable replacement for this one. That one will be good. Now one of the screws that had been fitted into the camera was entirely the wrong thread form, which of course is a problem because it means that it'll be difficult to get the correct screw back into the right place, and I think it might have been in this position. I may have to run a tap through that to clear that thread. Let me try another screw. The container I'm sorting through are almost entirely retina screws that have been a leftover from dealing to some parts camera typically. No, not that one. I like the look of that one. But Kodak used the same size of screws repeatedly. Now that's going in nicely. So that first screw I picked up had something wrong with it. And the strap plug goes on here. Now let's see if we can get this together. It's this cursed film release button, it's always the nuisance. So I'm holding that with a pair of tweezers from down low. That all appears to work nicely. What about the frame counters? What's that doing? That appears to work nicely too. Okay. So 2 screws in the top cover at this end. Now these ones are reclaimed. At least one of these was covered in adhesive. It had been used in the base plate. This one here for a start. It's not exactly pretty. But it is chrome plated. And 1 screw here at the end of the top cover. This one was all treated as a pup too by the looks of it. Okay. What about the rewind knob? Let's deal with that. Where's the tool?